Welcome to a special mini-series from the UT Dallas Comic Cast Network celebrating the 50th anniversary of UT Dallas's founding. You'll hear from the people who were there to witness the university's growth throughout the decades and learn more about what makes UT Dallas such a special place. Hi, I'm Catherine, and I'll be your guide as we look back through the years.
The 1970s was a topsy-turvy time in the United States. The fight for equality that was ignited in the 60s continued on. The Beatles broke up. President Richard Nixon resigned his office in the wake of the Watergate scandal. The country celebrated its bicentennial, and Star Wars debuted. At UT Dallas, the decade saw the university's first physical expansion, the arrival of the Love Jack sculpture on campus, the addition of junior and senior undergraduate students, and the creation of several schools, including the School of Management and the School of Arts and Humanities. It was also a time that saw the university's spirit and traditions begin to take shape. Dr. Brice Jordan was the first president of UT Dallas, serving from 1971 until 1981. He took the helm of an institution that was young but growing rapidly. The university expanded its faculty from 50 to 215 and increased student enrollment from 40 to more than 7,000 during his tenure. UT Dallas also began accepting juniors and seniors during his term, and he awarded the first bachelor's degrees at spring commencement in 1976. Among his many other UT Dallas legacies was his selection of the university's colors, orange and green. In a 2009 interview, he recalled his time at UT Dallas.
I had been made the offer by the Board of Regents of North Texas and had accepted the offer. And my now deceased wife, Jonelle, and I went to Denton to look over the president's home and decide on the colors of the rooms and where the new swimming pool was going to be. And I was very excited about that. Late one night, Jonelle and I were sitting up talking about our move to Denton. She went to bed, and I was still up reading, and I got a call from Mickey LeMayer, who then was chancellor of the UT system, asking me to turn down that offer and go to UT Dallas. I was very surprised because I was the least likely person around to be president of UT Dallas, being a historical musicologist and having been formerly head of the music department at UT Austin. And a few days later, after I had given up the North Texas job, I went up to Dallas to meet with a so-called selection committee of the faculty. That was chaired by a cosmologist, space scientist named Ivor Robinson. I met with that committee. I've forgotten who else was on it. I think Stan Rupert, who was a molecular biologist, and I think Anton Hales, who was head of geosciences, as they called it. I met with them. We talked for a while, and I was puzzled enough that I said to Ivor Robinson, why in the world would you scientists want this musicologist to be president of your university? And I never will forget Ivor's response. He said, Dr. Jordan, you don't know a thing about what we do, and we like it that way. And that's how I became president of UT Dallas. My mother was living in Weatherford, west of Fort Worth, near where she had grown up, and she was then in her 80s. She wanted to know about where I was going to work. So my wife and I went to Weatherford, picked her up, and brought her out to see, quote, the campus. There was a single dirt road running up to the Founders Building, and we drove onto that dirt road, and my mother said, Brice, what have they done to you? And that was sort of the impression, because there was a sign out on Campbell Road, the paint had peeled off of. I don't know whether it said SCAS or whether it said UT Dallas. It may have said one or the other, either Southwest Center for Advanced Studies or UT Dallas. And that was the extent of it. So that was my first impression. I thought we needed a logo. We didn't have one. And I sat down with some colored pencils and sketched this out. And I wanted it to have the UT in it for sure, because that's a prestigious pair of initials for the Dallas-Fort Worth area. But I wanted it to have a D there as well. So I drew the oblong shape and then put the dividing line between UT and D. And I wanted the colors of UT Austin in it, because I knew everybody would understand and would recognize burnt orange and white. But I wanted another color to identify it with UT Dallas, and thus the green was added. That's how it happened. And I knew that some of the things I suggested would never happen. And I envisioned that it would be heavily science-oriented. I saw the necessity that it have some strength in the social sciences and humanities. And so I drew up a plan which involved all of those. I decided that the institution should be as interdisciplinary as possible. That was a fairly new concept in those days. And still many great universities don't really don't pursue that sort of thing.
Dr. George Fair joined UT Dallas in 1975 as an assistant professor. Over the next 2 decades, he held various positions at the university. He became the dean of the School of Interdisciplinary Studies in January 1994 and the vice president of Diversity and Community Engagement in 2014. In 2000, he also started the Academic Bridge program, which helps high-potential first-generation college students complete a college education.
Well, I came when the actual undergraduate university began, which was the September of 1975. And I felt that it was a great opportunity to help begin a new university. I came from the University of Pittsburgh, which is a older, well-established university in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, obviously. I came to help bring a focus. We started at that time a special education program, a program that trained special education teachers, okay, and also for persons that wanted to become special education teachers. And my focus was on teaching math to students that were enrolled in special education programs. Yeah, well, when I first came, which is back, as I said, in September of 75, there were only the Johnson, the McDermott, and the Green buildings were just being opened. And so we just opened those in September, or really August of 75. The existing buildings were only Founders and Berkner, and there were no housing. The administration was located in a small temporary building on Waterview Parkway. So I guess I could say that the number of buildings clearly was less than 10, okay? It was just pretty much very much of a kind of small, isolated area in which we had this university we were beginning. The campus was most active in the evening, and there was not very much campus activity during the day. And so it was pretty much kind of barren during the day, but then the campus would come to life in the evening. I guess the favorite memory is just the idea of starting a new university and developing new courses, developing new programs, and we had the freedom to do that. And so I think that was the very optimistic thing that I think that was exciting. And it was also exciting for the students because several of the students that we had been either had gotten their first 2 years at the community college or were transfer students. Most of them were transfer students from other universities who had come and moved to this community but didn't have a way of completing their education, okay? And so when we started out with the upper division courses, it enabled many of these students that had not had an opportunity to complete their education to do so. Having been here for 45 years, okay, there was no way that you could imagine what it was going to be like 45 years later. You just hadn't, and the growth has been consistent over the years, and especially the moment in 1990 when we began to take in freshmen and sophomore to make it a full-scale university. That's been significant. And then just the growth that we've seen, that it's become a full-scale residential undergraduate and graduate university, and that I've been a major part had a major part to play in doing that.
Dr. Ross Roser joined UT Dallas as an assistant professor in 1975. He was executive director of the Callier Center for Communications Disorders from 1988 to 2006 and previous head of the doctoral program in audiology at UT Dallas. Roser's chief research interests lie in the application of hearing instrument technology to improving communication skills. He has been involved in developing and evaluating tactile aids, cochlear implants, and hearing aids.
At the end of August, we were all called into a conference room, and the Vice President for Academic Affairs, Dr. Alexander Clark, and Dr. Aram Glorg told us that we were now going to be changing our employment status and we're going to be part of UT Dallas, which is a great surprise. I mean, it was looming, but we didn't know all the details. Trying to keep a center of that magnitude afloat was getting to be a real challenge. So it gave the center some stability, and of course, it changed our whole mission. We were always involved in research. We always had a clinical program, but the educational program became more than just working with children who are hearing impaired, but included, of course, university students. And of course, at the time, it was only lower division undergraduate and the graduate programs. But overnight, we started all of our programs. The impact it had on our mission was outstanding. I mean, it was a major impact that has had a long-lasting and significant impact on society. I started after I finished my research project, I was looking for opportunities across the country, and Dr. Glorg came to me and he said, would I be interested in staying in Dallas and being the head of audiology? And it didn't take long to say yes, because I realized how important Callier was and the resources available, and it fit what I had in mind in terms of my own goals. Before 1999, audiology was a graduate program, but it was not a doctoral level program. In 1999, we transformed it into the AUD, or Doctor of Audiology program, and it is the third ranked program in the nation. We get over 100 applicants for about 15 positions, so it's very well recognized. I'm so honored to have been part of that. And my own career, I look back and go that it was serendipitous in the sense that it was unpredictable, and being part of it was a phenomenal opportunity. Not only are the things that we do affecting individual people, but we are training the clinicians of the future. And so when I go to national meetings and international meetings, and I meet our students who are now the leaders of the profession, giving talks, publishing papers, taking administrative roles where they are making the key decisions about how people with communication disorders, hearing loss, speech language, and hearing loss are being affected. It's I can't even express to you how satisfying that is.
Dr. Dennis Kratz joined UT Dallas in 1978 as an associate professor of arts and humanities from The Ohio State University. He held several positions within the School of Arts and Humanities, including Dean of the School from 1997 to 2019. Kratz has received numerous honors, including the University of Texas System Chancellor's Council Outstanding Teaching Award, the Person of the Year Award from the DFW Asian American Citizens Council, and a fellowship from the Woodrow Wilson Foundation.
I was at Ohio State University, which is huge and organized, and I knew my schedule for the next 30 or 40 years. I received a phone call from a good friend who said, I know the perfect place for you. And I remember replying, well, it's got to be in the Sun Belt near a big airport, and oh yes, interdisciplinary. And he said, yep. And I came down here for an interview for a position as associate professor, and the atmosphere was congenial and a little bit adventurous. It was new. It was the other part I would describe as chaotic. Nobody knew quite yet what was going on. It was only been a university for 3 years, really. And the sense was, if you came here, you're at the origin of something new and a chance to make it happen, to change it, to contribute to it, to have an impact. And what I started telling people years later, because that atmosphere remained, was, and it will have an impact on you. This isn't a place where you can come and do what you're supposed to do, but for example, the first question in the interview was, if you could teach anything you wanted, what course would you offer? Not, here's what we need. It wasn't a place where you were fitting into a predetermined order, but asked to, in some way, create that order. And that was the real. There were other kinds of the environment that go along with being chaotic. But I came down for an interview in June 1978. Was taken to Carolyn Gallerstein's house. She was then the dean of what was then called the School of General Studies. And I was interviewed by the swimming pool with Carolyn and the assistant professors who were part of the committee. And I'll never forget Victor Worsfold, who is one of the legendary original people here, was in an inner tube in the middle of the swimming pool and kind of paddled over to join the interview. And I went, this is okay. 78, I'll tell you, to 90, it was a strange Valhalla. The students were returning students because we only had juniors and seniors. I kept meeting these wonderful students, many of whom were women who had interrupted their college education to get married or have children or put their husband through school. And they were back in school now. We were just awash in these very intelligent students. And they just wanted to learn. Many went on for the PhD. One of the first students in my first class that I taught later went on to get her PhD and become an award-winning professor at the community college. So it was an atmosphere that I'd never encountered before with these returning students.
Dr. David Ford joined UT Dallas in 1975 as an associate professor of management and administrative sciences. His long list of accolades includes a Dallas Business Journal 2016 Minority Business Leader Award and one of the inaugural Lifetime Diversity Champion Awards from the UT Dallas Office of Diversity and Community Engagement. Ford retired from the university in 2017. At the time, he was the longest-serving faculty member in the Naveen Jindal School of Management.
First arrived at UTD July 1, 1975. Dr. Ray Lutz, who was the first dean of the School of Management, actually was here a year or two earlier, and I had met him at a conference. I had known him when he was on faculty at the University of Oklahoma, so this conference was in fall of 74. We struck up a conversation. I said, how are things with the Boomer Sooners in Oklahoma? He says, well, I'm not at Oklahoma anymore. I'm now at the University of Texas at Dallas. I'm the new first dean of the School of Management there. And so maybe 75 is the official start. But he and a handful of other faculty members were already on board at that time. So when I came home for the Christmas holidays in the fall of 74, I came out and met with him and a handful of faculty members who were here. And he says, listen, we're recruiting a lot of faculty, we're getting ready to start up undergraduate programs and so forth. And I grew up in Fort Worth. So he says, are you ready to come back home? And so they made me an offer I couldn't refuse. I had a lot of people they hired because they were starting upper division undergraduate courses in the fall of 75. A little hectic because we were scrambling to, put some courses together. I was actually recruited to help set up the MS in Management Science program, as well as design some of the doctoral seminars that they ran, because they also had a PhD program going at the time, and then identify other faculty members we could recruit in. So it was a little hectic, but the thing I liked about it was that it gave me an opportunity to get in on the ground floor, to really have an impact on the design of the curriculum and put my mark on it in that sense. And so, it felt good to be able to make a contribution in that way. Faculty was scattered all over about 5 or 6 different buildings. It's interesting because when I arrived in '75, they were talking about, well, we're going to get a school of management building. We'll have our own building at some point in the near future. Well, it took almost 25 years for that to happen. But it was great to finally have everybody under one umbrella, one roof, in one space. And that was kind of exciting to move into the new building because it had been talked about. Been pretty active professionally with the Academy of Management and an organization called the PhD Project, which I guess I really am proudest of. That was an organization that was started by KPMG accounting firm. The whole idea behind it was to be able to increase the number of African American, Hispanic American, and Native American business school faculty, because at the time there were less than 300 that they could identify across the U.S. And in the 25 years since its founding, they have quintupled that number. So it's over 1,500 people who own faculties at schools of business. The first president, now that he has transitioned, he's just retired, but he had the idea that, well, if we could change the way people look at the front of the classroom, maybe we could get more diverse students in the seats in the classroom. And so that was sort of the genesis for starting this. And I'm glad to have been on the ground floor because I've had a chance to mentor a number of young faculty members who've come up through the ranks. We've seen now people who got admitted to a doctoral program, finished, got appointed to faculties as an assistant professor, moved up through the ranks, have become deans, and now we have 2, possibly 3 people who have assumed the role of president, having come through the PhD project. And I mean, that's a great achievement.
Dr. Dean Sherry's career at UT Dallas began nearly 40 years ago in 1972. Sherry researches ways of refining diagnostic tools that may one day lead to better, more insightful diagnoses of medical conditions ranging from cancer to heart disease. Sherry was founding director of the Advanced Imaging Research Center housed at UT Southwestern Medical Center, where he has a dual appointment as a professor of radiology. In 2019, he was named interim dean for the School of Natural Sciences and Mathematics.
My name is Dean Sherry, and that was not a title at the time. And I came here in the fall of 1972. I had an NIH postdoctoral fellowship, it was actually a 2-year fellowship, and then I made the mistake of applying for a job because I was really enjoying the research. But, this opportunity came along for this new university in Dallas that was just kind of starting, and they were beginning a chemistry department. And I thought, well, that's interesting. So I sent a resume in, and they asked me to stop by. I was traveling through Dallas to go to a scientific conference, and, here I am. The way this started out, and people are always amazed when I tell the story about, this place originally was built by Texas Instruments. And in fact, the very first office I moved into in the basement of Berkner had a coat rack behind the door, and it had a white lab coat on there, and it said Center for Graduate Studies of the Southwest. And I kept that lab coat for about 30 years. And finally, it kind of fell apart, and I had to throw it away. But so that was the history, and it's remarkable because, Texas Instruments actually started as a geology company. And yet here they had recruited an entire group of molecular biologists from Germany here. And you say, well, what is molecular biology? I mean, that was way before the time. And here they were. So there was molecular biology, and there were space sciences and mathematics, and I guess physics, although that was pretty much space sciences at the time. And so chemistry, I guess, was one of the fundamental areas that they had to cover. So they hired a small group of us, and we started the chemistry department. You're young and naive, and everybody was looking for faculty jobs. And as I remember, there weren't that many at that particular year. They go up and down, they fluctuate. But something about Dallas was kind of still a relatively small but vibrant place, and the university was just starting. So the opportunities to have an influence, I think, was very attractive. So, the first years, I mean, quite honestly, we had very few students. We had a master's program initially, but, that was probably maybe a half a dozen students or so, something like that. And I tell people that I was very lucky because I didn't have a lab when I came here. Now, that sounds strange because most people wouldn't come unless they already had a lab built. Today, I mean, people, they got to have everything ready for them to get set up. But I say I was lucky because what happened was I came, and I was an experimentalist, so I needed, lab space. We were still building it, and so I just went off to UT Southwestern and walked into the biochemistry department and introduced myself to people, and they were very friendly and kind. And I met a faculty member there. His name was Larry Cottam, and he had this big pulsed NMR machine sitting in the corner, and I knew of Larry through the literature. And so he invited me just to come and work in his lab until the labs were finished out here. So I would come and teach my class, and then I would just head off to the med school. And so I got to know everybody in biochemistry at the time, and it really helped because when I started publishing, easily within the first year, the other three faculty who were here weren't, because they didn't have any equipment and space or anything. So it was really great for me. And the nice thing is, that's propelled me into something much bigger in terms of eventually ending up as a half-time faculty, appointment at Southwestern. I think the big thing, besides all these wonderful buildings that you see, I mean, is, this, quite honestly, when I came here and, the first building, second, third, and fourth, they were pretty ugly. I mean, pretty plain-looking buildings, lots of cement, very few trees. I mean, this was an ugly campus. And so the campus is now really quite magnificent. And so that's been great. But I think the thing that I really am amazed at is the quality of the undergraduate students. I mean, they're just phenomenal. I mean, absolutely phenomenal. So that's been extremely rewarding to be part of the very beginning. We used to get mostly junior college transfers, and there were good students among them. But overall, the quality of the students today is so much better. And so just to have the opportunity to work with young people is just so much fun.
Thanks for listening to this special mini-series. The CometCast Network is brought to you by the UT Dallas Office of Communications. You can find our other podcasts at www.utdallas.edu/CometCast.